Lyra sat at her desk, elbows resting on the smooth surface of a water panel. Droplets clung to her skin, catching the faint shimmer of her translucent blue veins. The air in her small apartment was damp, carrying the low hum of the circulation vents that kept the moisture at perfect balance for her kind. Outside her window, the vast ring of Echelon 9 rotated slowly, glowing against the dying red sun it orbited. Every rotation was the same. Every day felt identical. Her reflection on the water's surface looked tired. The faint glow of her pale blue skin had dulled, and the long black strands of her hair drifted in the humid air like slow waves. She stared at the screen in front of her, a housing terminal with an empty advertisement box blinking patiently. Room available. Quiet tenant preferred. Must be water tolerant. The words appeared in her elegant, careful script. Simple, short, and distant. It was not an invitation. It was a boundary. Lyra read it again and again, as if the message itself could promise that the tenant who answered would not disrupt the fragile calm she had built in this tiny apartment. But she knew she had no choice. The cost of living on Echelon 9 had climbed beyond reason, and her earnings as an artist had thinned to almost nothing. The galleries in the upper sectors wanted bright, bold, noisy art, not the quiet, flowing movements of Varithi water painting. Her pieces, delicate and slow, were fading from interest. She pressed submit. The message disappeared into the network, one ripple among thousands of others. Lyra exhaled softly and rubbed her wrists, feeling the cool slickness of her skin. She had always preferred solitude. Silence was her comfort, her shield. But silence was expensive here. Her gaze drifted to her water tank across the room. Inside, a half-finished painting floated in suspension, threads of color swirling like living smoke. The pigment shifted as the currents moved, changing shapes as if breathing. She had begun that piece weeks ago, but lately, her inspiration had dried like air left too long without mist. Lyra turned away, resting her chin against her hand. The red light from the dying sun bled through her window, painting her walls in shades of violet and indigo. A part of her longed for home, for Vareth with its deep oceans and bioluminescent gardens. The sound of water against coral walls, the slow songs that never used words. But home was far away now, and this was her reality. She stood, moving quietly toward the small control pad by the door. Her movements were fluid, every step deliberate. She adjusted the temperature, checked the humidity, and silenced the maintenance alert that had been blinking for 2 days. Her budget could not handle another repair call. Then, without warning, the door buzzer sounded. Lyra froze. The sharp tone echoed through the apartment, cutting through the low hum of the vents. She turned slowly toward the door, confusion rippling through her. The ad had only been posted an hour ago. No one could have responded so soon. Her pulse quickened. Perhaps it was a neighbor or a delivery error. She approached the door with quiet caution, her bare feet making no sound on the smooth floor. The screen by the door flickered to life, and there he was. A human. Lyra stared, her gills tightening with instinctive unease. Humans rarely came to this section of the station. The moisture, the temperature, even the smell of the recycled water systems. All of it was uncomfortable for their dry lungs and fragile skin. But this one stood there as if it were nothing. He was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a worn jacket. His hair was dark, and his eyes had a strange kind of warmth that caught her off guard. He carried a small travel bag, and there was something oddly calm about the way he waited. Lyra hesitated, then pressed the intercom. "Can I help you?" Her voice was soft, calm, and careful. The man smiled faintly. "I hope so. My name is Eli Mercer. I saw your ad. Room available, quiet tenant preferred, must be water tolerant." "I think that is me," Lyra blinked. "You are human," he nodded. "That is correct." Her gills fluttered once in disbelief. "This district is not designed for your species. The humidity is above 75%. You may find it uncomfortable." Eli shrugged lightly. "I worked 3 years in Echelon's coolant maintenance. Humidity does not scare me. What scares me is rent. Your place seems better than sleeping next to a power relay." His tone was relaxed, friendly, and strangely open. It disarmed her. Lyra hesitated again. The sensible answer was no. Humans were loud, unpredictable, and intrusive. They laughed too easily and filled silence like they feared it. But behind Eli, the dull red glow of the corridor pulsed steadily. She thought of the overdue rent notice flashing quietly on her wall panel. "Very well," she said finally. "You may look." The door slid open with a soft hiss. Eli stepped inside and paused, his eyes widening slightly as he looked around. The apartment was small but luminous, its walls alive with soft ripples of blue light. Thin streams of vapor shimmered near the ceiling, reflecting the station's faint gravity shifts. Her water tank glowed gently in one corner, casting fluid shadows across the floor. "This place," he said quietly, "feels alive." Lyra tilted her head. "It is functional," he smiled. "Functional can be beautiful." She watched him carefully. Humans were so expressive. Every small smile, every glance seemed charged with intent. He did not seem uncomfortable, even as drops of condensation began to gather on his hair. Lyra crossed her arms, her dark eyes unreadable. "The rent will be divided evenly. You will maintain your section, and you must not tamper with the water systems." "Understood," Eli said quickly. "I do not touch what keeps you breathing." His tone was teasing, but his eyes were serious. Lyra hesitated again. "You understand this is temporary," he nodded. "Temporary works for me." For a long moment, the two simply looked at each other, an alien of calm water and a man of restless warmth. It felt unnatural, impossible even, that they could share the same space. But Lyra could not ignore the quiet conviction in his eyes. Finally, she stepped aside and motioned toward the spare room. "It is that way," she said softly. Eli's smile widened just a little. "Thank you." As he walked past her, a faint warmth followed him, a strange contrast to the cool, misted air of her home. Lyra turned slowly, her gaze lingering on the faint footprints he left on the damp floor before they faded. She had wanted quiet. She had wanted peace, but as the door slid shut behind him, Lyra already sensed that peace was about to end, and for reasons she could not yet name. She was not sure if that was entirely a bad thing. The next morning began with sound. Lyra had not heard such noise in years. It was rhythmic, sharp, and utterly alien. At first, she thought the station's systems were malfunctioning again, but as the sound grew louder, she realized it came from inside her apartment. Music. Her eyelids flickered open, adjusting to the soft glow of her water tank. The melody thumped through the walls, breaking the gentle hum of the filters that usually lulled her into calm. She rose, strands of her black hair floating behind her, and stepped onto the cool floor. The sound came from the spare room, Eli's room. When the door slid open, Lyra stopped. Eli stood in the middle of the room, half-dressed, adjusting something on a small handheld device that projected glowing waves of sound. He was humming along, entirely unaware that every vibration felt like a storm against Lyra's sensitive hearing. The air was thick with the strange scent of human sweat and dry fabric. Lyra blinked slowly. "You are generating noise." Eli turned, startled. "Oh, sorry, I did not realize it traveled through the walls." "I can turn it down," she nodded stiffly. "Please do." He lowered the volume but kept the melody playing softly. Lyra's gills flicked once in irritation, but she said nothing more. She turned and returned to her desk, trying to lose herself in her art. Yet her focus drifted again and again to the new presence in her home. From the kitchen came the sound of clattering pans, then the unmistakable hiss of fire. The scent that followed was sharp and heavy, spices, oil, and heat that made the damp air tremble. Lyra wrinkled her nose. Varithi meals were cool, fluid, quiet. Human cooking was chaos in comparison. She drifted toward the source of the scent and found Eli leaning over the stove, stirring something in a metal pot. Steam rose around him in curling clouds. "You are boiling solid food," she said carefully. Eli smiled without turning. "It is called soup. Want to try some?" Lyra hesitated, her gills fluttering. "It smells aggressive," he laughed. "Yeah, it does that. But it tastes better than it smells." Lyra backed away. "I will trust your judgment." Eli only grinned. "Suit yourself." He carried on humming as he cooked, his movements quick and confident. The kitchen, once silent and orderly, now pulsed with energy. Lyra found herself watching from the hallway, torn between annoyance and fascination. Humans were strange creatures. They filled silence as if they feared it, and yet there was something strangely alive about it. like a pulse that refused to fade. That night, when the artificial lights dimmed to simulate evening, Lyra retreated to her water tank. The familiar feeling of immersion soothed her. The currents embraced her skin, soft and constant. For a while, she managed to forget the human energy outside her chamber. But even from within, she could still faintly hear him, humming again, tapping a rhythm against the wall as he worked on something mechanical. She sighed. "He never stops," she murmured to herself. Over the next few days, her peaceful apartment became something entirely new. Eli moved through it like a storm. He sang while cleaning, spoke to himself while fixing small devices, and asked her endless questions she never knew how to answer. What did her species eat? Did they sleep in water or on land? What were those glowing spheres by the wall? Could he touch one? Each time, Lyra would pause, stare, and reply in her calm monotone, "No." But even her cold responses never discouraged him. He seemed immune to discomfort. One morning, Lyra emerged from her tank to find Eli on the floor, tools scattered around him. The power conduit cover lay open. "What are you doing?" she asked, alarmed. "Fixing the flickering lights," he said simply. "They kept buzzing last night." "You should not interfere with the station systems," she warned. He shrugged, wiping a trace of grease from his fingers. "Relax, I know what I am doing. Maintenance is my specialty." She opened her mouth to argue, but then the lights brightened smoothly, their flicker gone. Eli glanced up with a grin. "See? No harm done." Lyra stared at him for a long moment, then turned away, muttering softly, "You are impossible." But the next night, when the light remained steady and warm, she found herself whispering quietly, "Thank you." He did not hear her. Days passed. Then weeks, and despite herself, Lyra began to notice small changes. The apartment felt less cold. The air carried faint traces of laughter, his laughter, echoing down the corridor when he watched old Earth broadcasts or told stories to himself. She pretended to be irritated, but when he was gone for hours at his repair shifts, the silence felt heavier than before. One evening, she emerged to find him sitting at the window, staring out at the red sun. The light painted his face in soft amber tones. "You do not sleep," she said. He looked over his shoulder. "Neither do you." Lyra tilted her head. "Sleep is not the same for us. We rest in rhythm with the filters. Sounds peaceful." "It was," she said quietly. "Before you arrived." Eli smiled at that, unbothered. "And now?" She hesitated. Her first instinct was to tell him the truth, that he was loud, strange, and far too bright for her world. But another truth hovered just behind that she no longer dreaded returning to the apartment after each art gallery rejection, that she no longer felt entirely alone. "Now," she said softly, "it is different." He nodded once as if he understood. They sat there for a while, both looking at the slow dance of ships outside the viewport. The red sun flickered on the glass like a fading heartbeat. Lyra told herself she was only tolerating him until her financial situation improved. But deep down, something more complicated had begun to form, a curiosity that felt too human for her comfort. The day began in silence, the kind Lyra had once loved. The hum of the vents was steady, the air smooth and cool. Eli had left early for his maintenance shift, and the apartment finally felt still again. She floated in her tank, working on a new painting. Threads of silver pigment swirled through the water, bending around her fingers as she shaped the image of a distant ocean. It reminded her of home, of the coral valleys of Vareth and the way light bent through deep water. The calm was comforting, but calm on Echelon 9 never lasted long. When she surfaced, the lights in the room flickered. Once, then again. The low vibration of the filters stuttered. Lyra frowned. The system had been stable for weeks. She reached for the control pad on the tank wall, but the screen only flashed static. A deep grinding noise rolled through the floor. Her gills flared with instinctive fear. The air began to thin, the moisture balance dropping sharply. The water in her tank trembled. Then the current stopped completely. The oxygenation vents went dark. "System error," the wall monitor crackled. "Water filtration failure. Manual reset required." Lyra's breath caught. Without the circulation, the oxygen in her tank would deplete within minutes. Her chest tightened immediately. She tried to climb out, but the surface air felt too dry, too thin. Every breath seared her lungs. Panic, cold and real, surged through her body. She stumbled toward the control panel, her wet feet slipping on the floor. The room tilted, her vision dimming at the edges. She hit the manual reset, nothing. The system was dead. "Eli," she gasped, though she knew he was not there. Her voice barely carried. The air grew thinner. Each breath scraped against her throat like sand. She reached the communication console and pressed for emergency services, but the response came too late, too distant. The nearest tech team would take at least 20 minutes to arrive. Lyra collapsed to her knees, the world blurring into blue and red shadows. Her chest heaved, her gills fluttered desperately, but there was no water left to breathe. Her hands clawed weakly at the floor as darkness began to close around her. Then through the haze, she heard a voice. "Lyra, open the hatch!" Her eyes fluttered open. Eli stood at the sealed entrance, pounding against the door. He must have returned early. She could barely lift her hand toward the access pad before her strength gave out. Eli saw her fall. Without hesitation, he slammed his shoulder into the hatch. Once, twice, then it burst open with a metallic crack. A rush of dry air swept through the room as he ran to her side. "Lyra, stay with me," he shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. His hand hovered over her shoulder, unsure if touch would help or harm. The control panel flickered again, warning lights flashing in a cascade of red. He looked up at the filter system, saw the melted conduit, and moved instantly. He tore off his jacket, using it to shield his hands from the heat, and began pulling open the wiring compartment. Steam hissed out as a spark grazed his arm, but he did not stop. "Come on," he muttered through clenched teeth, rerouting a cluster of cables with the speed of instinct. "Come on, work." The smell of burning metal filled the air. Lyra could only watch dimly as he moved, his face set in fierce concentration. Her vision flickered. Then, with a low hum, the system restarted. Water surged back through the lines. The tank hissed, then refilled in a rush of vapor and light. Oxygen flooded the air again, heavy and sweet. Eli caught her under the arms and half-carried, half-lifted her into the tank. She gasped as the cool liquid surrounded her, flooding through her gills in deep, desperate relief. The pain faded, replaced by the gentle rhythm of water against her skin. When she opened her eyes again, Eli was crouched beside the tank. His hands blistered and red from the burns. He exhaled shakily, then smiled. "You okay, fish girl?" Her first instinct was to be offended, but the expression on his face stopped her. It was not mockery. It was relief. She blinked slowly. "You saved me." "Yeah," he said softly, wincing as he flexed his burned fingers. "Could not just let my roommate drown in air." Lyra stared at him, at the human who had forced his way through a sealed hatch, risking electrocution and fire to fix a system he barely understood. His clothes were soaked from the burst pipes, his skin streaked with soot, yet his eyes were still bright, alive, steady. "You are injured," she said. He shrugged lightly. "Just a little burn. I have had worse." "You should not have done that," she whispered. "Maybe not," he said, "but I wanted to." The words hung between them, heavy and real. For a long moment, Lyra did not speak. She simply watched him as the water currents shimmered around her. The sound of the filters, once ordinary, now felt like the rhythm of her heartbeat. He stood, shaking water from his arms. "I will fix the rest of the system tomorrow." "The wiring is old." Lyra pressed a hand against the glass. "Eli?" He turned. Her expression softened, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it. "Thank you." For once, he did not make a joke. He only nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Any time." That night, the apartment felt different. The usual blue light seemed warmer somehow, more alive. Lyra drifted in her tank, unable to stop thinking about him. The human who smelled of heat and metal, whose laughter had once annoyed her, whose chaos had now saved her life. When she closed her eyes, she could still hear his voice echoing softly through the glass. "Stay with me." She did not understand why those words lingered, but she knew this. Something between them had shifted, something fragile and new, and it frightened her more than the silence ever had. Days passed after the accident, but the memory refused to fade. Lyra caught herself replaying the moment over and over. The sound of Eli's voice through the haze, the way his hands moved even while burning, the desperate warmth in his eyes when she woke. It was something no Varethi would have done. It was reckless, uncontrolled, human. Eli spent the next few days repairing what he called that stubborn excuse of a filter. He moved through the apartment with tools clinking at his belt, humming strange earth tunes while muttering half-words to himself. Lyra, floating in her tank, pretended to be uninterested, but her eyes followed him whenever he worked. He had bandaged his hands with thermal wraps, yet still insisted on cooking, fixing, cleaning, and talking, and always talking. "Back home," he said one evening, crouched under the sink, "I used to repair oceanic turbines. Never thought I would end up fixing an art tank for a space mermaid." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Mermaid?" Eli chuckled. "Mythical creature from Earth. Beautiful women with fishtails. They sing sailors to their doom. You would fit right in." "I do not sing," Lyra replied, trying not to show the small smile tugging at her lips. "Good. I am a terrible swimmer." For the first time, she laughed, quietly but real. It startled her. From then on, their days found rhythm. He worked the station's lower decks, repairing circuits and ventilation lines. She painted again, this time with more color, bold, fluid shapes that reminded her of heat and laughter. At night, when he returned, they shared food at the table, the faint scent of his cooking mixing with the oceanic air of her tank. Eli talked about Earth, about rain that fell endlessly, about trees that bent under wind, and oceans that stretched farther than the eye could see. He described storms that roared like living beasts and sunsets that set the sky on fire. Lyra listened with quiet fascination. "Your planet sounds untamed," she said one night. "It is," he said with a small grin. "That is what makes it beautiful." In turn, Lyra began to share her world. The floating gardens of Vareth, where water shimmered like glass, and creatures sang in low, melodic tones. She told him how Varethi art was painted underwater, shaped by current and rhythm rather than brush. Eli listened intently, as though her every word built a world he had never imagined. One night she emerged from her tank to show him a new painting. It glowed softly on the wall, swirls of silver and deep blue blending into shapes that looked almost like waves, but not quite. "It is called stillness," she said. "It is what peace feels like to me." Eli stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "It looks alive." Lyra tilted her head. "Art should breathe even if the artist cannot." He looked at her then, really looked. The shimmer of her blue skin reflected in the light, her black hair damp and heavy against her shoulders, her long ears curving elegantly. There was something ethereal about her, something fragile and strong at the same time. "You know," he said softly, "you are not what I expected when I answered that ad." "What did you expect?" "Someone quiet. Someone who would hate me." Lyra blinked, surprised. "You thought I would hate you?" He shrugged. "Most aliens on this station keep their distance. I do not blame them. Humans have a reputation for being loud." "You are loud," she said plainly. Eli laughed, running a hand through his hair. "Fair enough." A soft silence followed. For the first time, it did not feel heavy. It felt calm, full even. Later that night, Lyra stood by the window, watching the distant glow of the planet below. She could hear Eli in the kitchen, washing dishes, humming another strange tune. Her heart felt warm, and she did not understand why. Her art began to change. The once perfect symmetry of Varethi style gave way to flowing, unpredictable strokes. Her canvases filled with light, motion, and color. Human qualities. Chaos, warmth, laughter. The same energy Eli carried wherever he went. When Eli saw her latest piece, he stopped mid-sentence. "That looks like a sunrise." "I have never seen one," Lyra said. "You described it once, light breaking through clouds. I tried to imagine how it would feel." He looked at the painting, then at her. "You got it right." The words made her chest tighten. Their nights grew longer. They talked until the station dimmed into artificial night, trading stories about fear, hope, and loneliness. Lyra learned that Eli had left Earth after losing someone he loved, a sister who had drowned during a storm. The water he once loved had turned against him. Now he lived on a station where everything was metal and air. Lyra listened in silence. When he finished, she spoke softly. "You saved me from drowning in air. Perhaps that is how you heal." Eli looked at her, surprised. You think so? I know so. He smiled, a quiet, grateful smile that reached his eyes. From that night on, something unspoken began to bloom between them. Not love, not yet, but understanding. A shared space between two worlds. When she painted, he repaired. When he laughed, she listened. When she fell silent, he filled the air with warmth. Lyra found herself counting the hours until he returned each day. The silence she once craved now felt lonely when he was gone, and though neither said it aloud, both began to realize they were no longer just roommates. They were becoming something more. Something neither the laws of Echelon 9 nor the distance between worlds could easily define. The peace they had built did not last. On Echelon 9, peace rarely did. It began with a quiet announcement echoing through the station's public channels, a new regulation passed by the Interspecies Council. Cross-species cohabitation, the voice said coldly, is temporarily suspended pending review after a recent incident on Deck 12. Lyra froze in place. The brush slipped from her fingers, drifting through the water in slow, helpless spirals. The words repeated again, each syllable heavy as stone. She felt her stomach tighten. She knew what it meant. Humans and Varethi were not permitted to live under the same roof. Not anymore. Eli was working that shift, somewhere deep in the station's lower decks, repairing pressure seals. When he returned hours later, covered in grease and exhaustion, she was waiting at the door, pale, trembling, her usually calm voice shaking. Eli, she said quietly, you cannot stay here. He stopped, his tired eyes instantly alert. What do you mean? The council has banned cohabitation. It is not safe for you, he frowned. Safe for me? Lyra, they will, she interrupted. If they find out you are here, they will fine you, deport you, or worse. They will take everything from you. You must leave before the inspectors come. For a moment, silence filled the room, thick with the hum of the air vents. Eli stared at her, as if trying to understand something she refused to say. Then his expression hardened. No, he said simply. Lyra blinked. No, I am not leaving you alone in this, he said firmly. They can take my license, they can question me, but I will not let them throw you to the council's mercy. Eli, he stepped closer. You said I saved your life once. Let me keep it safe again. She wanted to argue, to shout, to order him to go, but the words would not come. Instead, she turned away, hiding the trembling of her hands. You are a fool, human. I have been called worse, he said, a soft smile flickering across his face. That night, they barely spoke. Lyra sat by the window, her reflection shimmering in the glass, while Eli disassembled one of his repair kits, muttering about looking useful if they show up. The silence between them was not the comfortable kind anymore. It was heavy, anxious, and full of things neither dared to say. The next morning, the door buzzer rang. Lyra's heart stopped. Through the translucent door screen, two figures stood, station inspectors, their silver uniforms gleaming under the cold corridor lights. One was a tall insectoid official from the Jarek species, the other a human officer with sharp eyes and a tablet in hand. Routine inspection, the officer said. Cross-species housing check. Please open the door. Lyra turned to Eli in panic. Hide, she whispered, but Eli shook his head. No. Before she could stop him, he pressed the door release. The panel slid open with a soft hiss. The inspectors entered, scanning the room with methodical precision. Their eyes paused on the tools, the human-sized bed, the cooking equipment. The human officer raised an eyebrow. This apartment is registered to a Varethi citizen, correct? Yes, Lyra managed, her voice quiet. Lyra Ven. Then why are there human modifications installed here? Before she could respond, Eli stepped forward. Because I installed them, he said. I am her maintenance technician. The officer looked him over. Technician? Your ID, please. Eli handed it over without hesitation. The officer scanned it, then frowned. This license is not registered for this sector. It was a favor, Eli said quickly. Her system was failing. I fixed it. That is a violation of work zone policy, the officer said coldly. Your license will be suspended pending review. Lyra felt her throat tighten. Please, he was only helping. Silence, the insectoid inspector hissed. Unauthorized assistance is not permitted. The regulation is clear. They recorded the infraction, confiscated Eli's ID, and left as quickly as they had arrived. The door sealed shut behind them with a sharp click that echoed through the apartment. Lyra stood frozen, unable to move. Eli turned toward her, still wearing that calm, maddening half-smile. "Well," he said quietly, "that could have gone worse." Her voice cracked. "They took your license, your work. Why would you—" "Because I meant what I said," he interrupted. "I am not leaving you alone." She stared at him, words trembling on her tongue, but none escaped. Instead, she turned away, slipping back into her tank. The water felt colder than usual, heavier. When she looked out again, Eli was gone. Days passed. The apartment fell silent once more. The faint hum of his tools, his laughter, the warmth of his voice, all gone. Lyra tried to paint, but her hands refused to move. Every color she touched turned gray. The stillness she once loved now felt suffocating. One night she floated in her tank, staring at the unfinished canvas across the room. Her heart felt hollow. For the first time since leaving Vareth, she truly understood loneliness. Then something inside her broke, or perhaps awakened. She climbed out of the tank, water trailing down her arms, and stood before her largest canvas. Without hesitation, she began to paint. Her strokes were bold, desperate, alive. Blues collided with gold, shadows met light, and shapes emerged. Two figures, one human and one Varithi, standing under the same beam of radiant light. Their forms blended yet remained distinct, not merging but understanding. By dawn, the painting was complete. She called it Shared Horizon. Later that day, she carried it to the central plaza of Echelon 9. The plaza's massive holo display projected news, ads, and endless chatter, until Lyra connected her datapad and overrode the feed. In an instant, the entire square transformed. Her artwork blazed across every screen. The crowd fell silent. People stared transfixed, humans, Varithi, and dozens of other species. Some whispered, some smiled, some wept. The image spread through the station network within minutes, shared faster than any official could suppress it. It became a symbol, not just of defiance, but of hope, of connection that defied law and species. Within a week, the council withdrew the ban. Lyra returned to her apartment exhausted, hands trembling, heart heavy but proud. For the first time in her life, she had not painted to escape. She had painted to change something, and somewhere deep inside she wished Eli could have seen it. She had wanted to find peace. Instead, she had found courage. The days that followed felt strangely quiet but not empty. The ban had been lifted, and whispers filled every corridor of Echelon 9. Whispers of the Varithi artist who had dared to stand against the council, and of the human engineer who had broken the rules for her. Lyra tried not to listen. She focused instead on her art, though her thoughts drifted constantly to Eli. His absence echoed through the apartment like a faint hum that would not fade. She found herself glancing at the door whenever it chimed, hoping it might be him. It was late evening when it finally happened. The door buzzer rang, soft but certain. Lyra froze mid-stroke, her brush hovering over the canvas. For a heartbeat, she did not move. Then she set the brush down, her heart pounding like the rhythm of distant engines. When the door opened, he was there, tired, grease-stained, hair messy, and still wearing that half-smile she had not realized she missed so deeply. "Hey, fish girl," Eli said softly. "Did I miss anything?" Lyra just stood there, her throat tight, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You should not call me that," she whispered, though her voice wavered. "I know," he said, "but it makes you roll your eyes, and I missed that." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The faint blue light of her apartment wrapped around them both, soft and shimmering, like the calm after a storm. Then she stepped aside and said simply, "Come in." Eli entered, setting his worn tool bag by the wall. His eyes drifted to the massive projection on the far side of the room, her new painting. It depicted the apartment itself, bathed in soft blue light, two silhouettes standing by the window, looking out into the endless stars. Above it, glowing in delicate white script, was the title, The Blue Apartment. He stared at it for a long moment, his smile fading into something quieter, deeper. "You painted this?" "Yes. Why?" Lyra hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. Because this was the first place that felt like home. Eli looked at her, eyes softening. Even with me around. Especially with you around, she said. He chuckled, shaking his head slightly, then glanced around. You fixed the lights. They used to flicker. I learned, she said. From watching you, that made him smile again. A real, genuine one this time. He reached out, hesitating for a moment before touching her arm gently. Her skin shimmered faintly beneath his fingers, water molecules reacting to warmth. It was strange and beautiful all at once, Lyra, he said quietly. Thank you. For what you did. Everyone on the lower decks is talking about it. You changed things. She looked down, almost embarrassed. I did not want to change the world. I only wanted to keep a friend. He laughed softly. You managed both. They sat by the window after that, as they often used to. Outside, the stars pulsed like distant lanterns, and the station drifted through the black sea of space in steady silence. The hum of engines below was soft, comforting. Eli spoke about his time under investigation, how they had made him scrub reactors, how one officer had actually thanked him for saving her cousin's Varithi partner during a hull breach. Guess word travels fast, he said with a grin. Lyra listened, her eyes tracing the way his smile reached his eyes. You risked everything for me, she said quietly. I do not understand why. Because, he said, leaning back against the cool metal wall, some people are worth breaking rules for. For a moment, the air between them felt charged, quiet but full. Lyra looked away, pretending to adjust a panel, though her pulse betrayed her calm expression. She picked up a small holoscreen that had been blinking on her desk. A message notification pulsed at the corner. New message, the voice interface said. Lyra opened it. The hologram displayed a logo, Earth Cultural Council, Arts Division. Her breath caught. The message read, Congratulations, Lyra Venn. You are invited to present your work at the Global Art Symposium. New York City, Earth. Travel arrangements will be provided. Eli leaned forward, his eyebrows rising. Wait, Earth? As in my Earth? She nodded slowly. It seems so, he grinned. You have to go, Lyra hesitated. I do not know if humans are ready to see a Varithi artist. Oh, trust me, Eli said with a laugh. They have seen worse. You will blow their minds. She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. How do humans feel about the color blue? Eli met her gaze, his expression soft. They say it is the color of peace, of home. Lyra turned back to the window where the stars shimmered like scattered paint across a black canvas. The two of them sat there in the calm glow of the blue apartment, the soft hum of the station carrying them through the void. She had wanted a roommate. Instead, she had found something infinitely rarer, connection. The kind that crossed species, silence, and distance. Outside, the dying red sun of Echelon 9 shimmered faintly against the curve of space, and for the first time, it looked less like an ending and more like a beginning. The camera would fade slowly to black, the faint reflection of their silhouettes still visible in the glass. Two lives intertwined by accident, now bound by choice, and just before the last glimmer vanished, Lyra's quiet voice would echo through the stillness. Maybe blue was never just a color. Maybe it was the space between us all along. Fade to black.